Hi, my name is Saaleha, and I'm a writer and photographer based in Johannesburg, South Africa. So, what is it that I do actually? As a photographer, I'm a bit of a generalist. I do lifestyle and event photography. I'm quite passionate about food and product photography, so that takes up quite a bit of my time. And apart from my photography work, I'm also a writer, and my first collection of poetry, which is called Zikr, was lucky enough to win the 2020 Ingrid Jonker Prize for Poetry. And this is Zikr. If you're interested in reading it, you can find excerpts of it online. You can also get copies of Amazon, exclusive books, the African Books Collective as well. Um, so yeah, why is it that I do what I do? The photography side of my work is basically, I could say, it's part art and also part driven by a capitalist imperative to actually earn money. So that's the way I make a living, is by doing photography. But I also find that it's very important in the age that we're living in, that is so saturated by imagery, where you are competing with millions of photographs being uploaded online every second, that the imagery you put out there sort of stands out from the rest and is actually meaningful. And for me, that's very important, not to just photograph for photographing sake, but for each image to have meaning and intent behind it. And that's sort of what drives my work, whether it's wedding photography, wedding documentary, or lifestyle photography, where we're doing a session with a family or a newborn baby. And it even extends all the way towards product and food photography. So every time I'm behind my lens, I want to make an image that is meaningful and has some sort of considered intent behind it. And that intent could be anything from just creating a really beautiful image that speaks to someone, which will be a source of happiness for someone for the day, or whether the aim of that image is to sell a product or to convince someone to try something new. And that's what I try and make my photography about, that it's meaningful and it's with intent. And that also goes for travel photography and all those sorts of things, that anything you put out into the world should have some kind of meaning and intent. And I think when your images have that behind them, they will sort of like live longer out there and rise above the noise. In terms of my writing work, a lot of my creative expression is through poetry. And poetry for me has always been a way of figuring out the world around me. Or it's also been a way of me processing things that I grapple with or find it difficult to understand. I mean, it goes without saying that the last year and this year have been very difficult years for all of us, and it's so easy to kind of feel like, what now? How do we process where we are? How do we plan for the future? There's so much of anxiety and uncertainty. And one of the ways that I find I'm able to cope with that, with that sense of foreboding, but at the same time trying to not be too depressed about things, is that I turn to writing. And my format is poetry. It's not the same for everybody else, but I somehow find it easier to put down words, to look for images or metaphors or ways to understand the world in almost like a surreal sense, but that still kind of comes back to concrete meaning when I put images and words down on a page. So that's how I came to poetry. For me, poetry initially was a kind of a cathartic way of processing my emotions. And I've also realized that even if you're not writing for an audience, that it's important for you to write for yourself and put things down on paper. And again, it doesn't have to be poetry. So things like journaling and daily diaries or that kind of thing, even blogging, if that's what you're into, updating something online that's personal. Um, just I think we all need to find ways to express ourselves, because I feel that if we bottle too much of these things up, it becomes toxic inside of us. And it I mean, people say such terrible things online, and I sometimes feel that trolls online are just people who haven't had a chance to just kind of, process themselves and the world they're in. So the poetry that I write, a lot of it is personal. Quite a bit of it deals with familial relations. What is it to be a woman growing up in a complicated world? What is it to be a woman from a minority? Um, just how do we function in this world? How do we deal with issues like loss and grief and all these things? So for me, even though the writing comes from a personal space, I feel that by writing about these themes, it becomes sort of universal in a way that anyone from any background could read my work and relate to it. And for me, that's very important. I feel a poetry builds bridges. Poetry generates understanding between different people, and yeah, like when I was growing up, I never really saw poets on a page that I could relate to in terms of the backgrounds that they were from. None of them were from minorities. Very few were women of color. It's important to have a channel through which to sort of like put your creativity out there, whether it is poetry, whether it is prose, whether it's nonfiction, memoir, essays, even a blog. Um, I just feel it's important to, by writing, that's how you know yourself. As soon as things are down on a page or up on a screen, that's when your thoughts, I think, are at their most clear. So many of us have all these big ideas floating around our heads, but once it's in words, in a almost tangible, concrete form, that's when things start to happen. So how is it that I do what I do? For photography, again, it depends on the project. Uh, I am mostly, my learning in photography was mostly self-directed. So I started off with it being a hobby. And I really enjoyed food photography. I used to take photos for my food blog. I still do. It's a bit of a irregularly updated blog. Um, but that's what got me into photography, was food photography. And once I thought my work was at a high enough standard that I could offer it as a service for other people, I started doing photography for small businesses and home industries. So you would get these ladies at home who do such beautiful cupcakes and cakes and little eats and things like that. But the photos that they were posting of their work did such a disservice because you couldn't really see the quality of what it was they were producing, because they were taking images with cell phones. And back then, our phone cameras weren't that great. I mean, if you can remember the sort of like grainy, blurry stuff that used to come out of a BlackBerry phone camera, that was the quality that most of these women were working with. So I thought I could come along, bring a bit of expertise to their offering, photograph their work, put it online for them, and in that way, sort of like, I mean, even though it was kind of an exchange, I mean, for me, it was a business. It was a way to earn money. And for them, it obviously helped improve their business because now they had excellent photography to now market themselves better. So from the food photography for small businesses, I started doing event photography. I started getting into wedding photography, which is quite intense, but also really interesting because wedding photography is a great way to take different forms of photography and like pack it all into one. Because with wedding photography, it's portraiture, it's food photography, it's documentary. It kind of brings a whole lot of disciplines into one kind of thing. And all along the way, I was learning. I was watching YouTube tutorials. I was practicing. I was photographing every day. I did a photo a day for a whole year, which meant that I had to take a photograph a day, each and every day. And that was great practice because it helped hone my eye, my understanding of light, and that kind of thing. So for me, a lot of what I do is um, comes from learning online, learning from books, learning from mentors, people around me. And I feel it's so important to like never ever get complacent, always learn all the time. As for my writing, what works in terms of my practice is to keep a notebook on me all the time. And if I don't have a notebook, I've got an app on my phone. It's Google Keep, which if you've got a Google account, you've already got access to it. And the great thing with Google Keep is it's a notes app, so you can update it on your phone. but it will also automatically be saved to the cloud so that if you on a PC or a laptop, you'll be able to go to your Google Keep account and the exact information will be there. So it's essentially a digital notebook. And the great thing with Google Keep is you can upload images, you can upload sound, you can upload a doodle, a scribble, and obviously notes and things. So you can use it for a lot of mundane things like a list of errands, a list of chores, grocery list, that kind of thing. But also, if an idea pops into your head, if a line, something that you feel could become something else, maybe it could be the first line of a short story, or it could be a line in a poem, anything, you could just you have to write these things down immediately, because I promise you that that genius idea will soon dissipate if you don't mark it down, and you will never remember. It's kind of like when you wake from an intense dream and you're like, oh no, I need to remember this, and by the afternoon that whole thing is gone. So unless you keep a dream journal or that kind of thing. So yeah, that's kind of how I go about my writing. I keep a notebook with me all the time. So I've got the notebook, I've got Google Keep, I've got a Word document that's on my computer that also keeps all my errant thoughts and scraps of things. And then what happens is when I do get a bit of time, I often go back to these little notes and I see what I can build from that. So in that, it's also important, if you want to get into writing, be it poetry or prose or nonfiction memoir, is to have a daily writing routine. And yeah, that's why I do what I do. Thanks for listening.